You look at them after the betrayal and think they escaped. Maybe weeks passed, maybe months. They look calm, light, almost refreshed, and you are the one barely holding your body together, trying to breathe through a pain that feels bigger than heartbreak, bigger than loss, bigger than language. But stay with me, because what you see on their face is not peace. It is a pause, a mask, a delay before something much deeper starts breaking inside them. Right now it looks like they won. Right now it looks like they walked away untouched while you were left carrying the fire, the questions, the shock, the silence. But keep watching, because this is where most people misunderstand the whole story. The one who betrays a deep soul can look powerful in the beginning. They can look free, they can look happy. That is the illusion. And illusions always have an expiration date. What looks like relief can become emptiness. What looks like control can turn into collapse. What looks like distance can become a prison with no exit. So if you have been staring at their life and wondering how they moved on so easily, listen closely. This is not the ending you thought it was. This is the setup. This is the hidden cost. And before we get into it, I need you to hear one thing with your whole heart. You were not abandoned because you were too little. You were pushed away because you touched something in them they could not manage. And once that truth lands, everything changes. Stay with me, because what comes next explains the silence, the coldness, the betrayal, and the fallout they never saw coming. At the moment they betray you, their body can reward them. That part matters. Whether it was cheating, ghosting, lying, or suddenly turning cold, they may feel a short hit of freedom, a quick rush, a private sense of power. For someone who fears being overwhelmed by closeness, cutting the bond can feel like fresh air hitting the lungs. It feels like escape. It feels like space. It feels like control coming back. That is why they can seem so calm while you are falling apart. Not because they are healed, not because they are stronger, but because they have shut down the part of themselves that would have to feel the damage in real time. They go into survival mode, they disconnect, they flatten out, they convince themselves the relationship was the problem and distance is the cure. In their mind, your love became pressure, your presence became intensity, your ability to see them became danger. So they run from the mirror and call it freedom. They step away from the fire and tell themselves they just saved their own life. But what they do not understand yet is this: they did not only cut off a relationship, they cut off the very connection that had been steadying them for longer than they realized. You were not just someone who loved them, you were the person helping them feel less lost inside themselves. You were calming storms they did not know how to name. You were bringing steadiness to places in them that had never learned how to rest. And once that stabilizing force is gone, the truth does not hit all at once. It arrives later, quietly, coldly, and when it does not ask permission. A super empath is not just emotional. A super empath feels deeply, reads deeply, notices deeply. They do not only hear words, they hear tone, pauses, tension, energy, all the things other people miss. And in a relationship with someone avoidant, that creates a bond that feels almost unreal. The avoidant may not understand what is happening, but they feel different around you, less tense, less scattered, less hunted by their own inner noise. They do not always know why they sleep better near you, why their body softens around you, why their mind feels quieter after talking to you. They may even think they are finally becoming stronger on their own. But often what is really happening is that your presence has become a kind of emotional shelter. You were reading pain they could not say out loud. You were answering needs they could not admit they had. You were soothing wounds they had hidden even from themselves. That creates dependence, even when they refuse to call it that. And then comes the fatal mistake. They start believing the peace they feel belongs entirely to them. They start thinking, I am doing better now. I do not need this person. Maybe this person is the one making things heavy. So they pull away from the very bond that had been helping them function. It is like someone breathing through an oxygen line and deciding the tube is too restrictive, too annoying, too close. So they tear it off and call that independence. At first, there is still air in the lungs. At first, they still feel fine. That is why the illusion is so convincing. But cutting the source and feeling the consequence are never the same moment. There is always a gap, and inside that gap, many people mistake relief for proof. You keep asking the same question in the dark. If I meant that much, why would they destroy it? If I gave them safety, why would they hurt me? If I loved them so deeply, why would they answer that love with betrayal? The answer is painful, but it is not random. For an avoidant person, closeness can feel good and terrifying at the same time. They crave connection, but only up to a point. Past that point, what feels like safety to you can start to feel like threat to them. Real intimacy asks them to stay visible, to stay soft, to stay honest, to stay in contact with needs and fears they spent years burying. And when that inner pressure rises, they do not always know how to say, I am overwhelmed, I am scared, I do not know how to hold this much love. Instead, something flips. Suddenly your warmth feels too intense, your loyalty feels heavy, your availability feels invasive. They start rewriting the story so they can escape without feeling like the villain. They focus on your flaws. They enlarge small issues. They say you are too emotional, too demanding, too much. This is how they build the case against the very person who cared for them most. Then comes the sabotage, the betrayal, the lie, the distance, the cold detachment. Not because the connection meant nothing, but because it meant too much, and they did not have the tools to stay inside something that real. They would rather injure the bond than risk being consumed by it. They would rather destroy the bridge than admit they are afraid to cross it. And in that moment, they think they saved themselves. What they really did was choose fear over growth, defense over love, trauma over truth. After the rush fades, the real bill starts arriving. Not always in a dramatic scene, not always in tears. Sometimes it shows up in the body first, in the nights that feel strangely restless, in the stress that sticks for no clear reason, in the strange emptiness after a hard day when there is no one to reach for, no one who instantly understands, no one who can read the silence and respond with care. This is where their old pattern starts failing them. Before they met you, they may have been used to a lower emotional level, a half-numb way of living, a life where distance was normal and real closeness was rare. Then they met you, and you expanded the standard. You showed them what it felt like to be deeply known, emotionally held, gently understood without having to explain every wound. Once a person experiences that kind of connection, even if they reject it later, something inside them remembers. Their system remembers. So when stress returns and the old ways of coping no longer work like they used to, the body begins reaching for what once brought relief. It looks for your voice, your calm, your way of making chaos feel survivable, but you are not there. That absence becomes a private shock. They try work, distraction, social media, new people, late nights, overtraining, numbing, anything that can keep them from feeling the truth. But the problem is not boredom. It is withdrawal from the one bond that made their inner life easier to carry. And what makes this harder is that they often cannot admit that clearly, even to themselves. So they call it stress, burnout, bad luck, a phase. Meanwhile, the ache keeps building beneath the surface. Then comes the rebound phase, and this part confuses a lot of people. You see them with someone new, or talking to new people, or posting like life is moving forward, and it hits your chest like proof that you are replaceable. But what looks like moving on is often just searching in the wrong direction. The avoidant does what they have always done when discomfort rises. They reach for a substitute. They look for someone easier, lighter, less intense, less demanding, someone who will not pull them that deep, someone who will not challenge them to speak the truth in full sentences. And in the beginning, this can feel perfect, smooth, relaxed, simple, no big emotions, no heavy intimacy, no pressure. But then real life begins. The conversations stay shallow. The moments stay surface level. The new person does not pick up on shifts in energy the way you did. They do not notice the sadness behind the sarcasm. They do not know when the silence means fear instead of anger. They do not instinctively reach for the invisible wound. Suddenly, the avoidant has to explain themselves, and that is where the system starts glitching, because with you, much of the connection felt effortless, not easy, but intuitive. With someone new, they have to translate themselves manually. They have to use words where before they relied on being silently understood. And for someone who already struggles with emotional language, that feels exhausting. So the new person starts to feel boring, annoying, disconnected, not because that person is bad, but because they are being measured against a depth they never agreed to compete with. The avoidant keeps hoping the next one will feel like you without asking as much as you asked. But depth without risk is fantasy, and every attempt to recreate you without changing themselves ends the same way: flat, restless, unfinished. This is where shame enters, and shame is heavier than sadness. When you loved them, you reflected something good back to them. You saw pain, yes, but you also saw possibility. You saw the softer person under the armor. You saw the part of them that could be kind, loyal, open, brave. Your belief in them became a mirror they could almost trust. Around you, they could feel more decent, more worthy, more human. That is one reason your presence mattered so much. But after betrayal, that mirror is gone. Now they are left alone with the version of themselves their own choices created. And that is not an easy image to face. Underneath the cool attitude and the excuses, many avoidant people carry an old belief that says something is wrong with me, that if anyone gets too close, they will eventually see the damage and leave. When they betray someone who truly loved them, they do not just hurt another person. They confirm their own darkest fear. They become, in their own eyes, the one who ruins what is good, the one who damages what is safe, the one who reaches for love and then crushes it. And because pride is often sitting on top of that shame like armor, they cannot easily repair the break. A sincere apology would require humility. Real accountability would require staying present in the pain they caused. They may not feel capable of that, so the guilt stays inside them. It hardens. It follows them into quiet rooms, into random songs, into ordinary evenings, into the face in the mirror when nobody is there to distract them. They can explain it away to friends. They can retell the story in a flattering way. But alone, the memory still knows what happened. There is another reason they do not fully recover, and it has to do with unfinished endings. Human beings do not easily forget what never got resolved. A clean goodbye may hurt, but it gives the mind a place to land. It gives pain a shape. It gives the nervous system a completed chapter. But betrayal rarely gives closure. Ghosting does not give closure. Sudden coldness does not give closure. Walking away in confusion does not give closure. It leaves an open loop. It leaves a sentence without a final word, and that unfinished space stays active in the mind far longer than people expect. The avoidant thinks disappearing is the fastest way out. No long talk, no deep feeling, no messy truth, just cut and run. But what they often create instead is a private loop that keeps restarting in the background. They begin wondering things they cannot settle. Did I ruin the best thing I had? Why did I run when it was getting real? What would have happened if I stayed? Do they still think about me? Are they happier without me? These questions do not always come as thoughts they can clearly say out loud. Sometimes they show up as sudden heaviness, random memories, strange mood drops, or emotional distance they cannot explain. Meanwhile, you, the one who got hurt, may be the one who actually does the healing work. You cry, you rage, you replay, you grieve, you slowly understand, you build meaning from the damage. You close the chapter piece by piece. That is why the pain can hit you harder first, but free you sooner later. They suppress, you process. And suppressed pain does not disappear. It waits, it circles, it returns at odd hours and inconvenient moments, asking the same question in 100 different forms. And then something happens that truly shakes them. Your silence becomes real. At first they may expect you to chase. They may assume there will be long messages, tears, attempts to fix it, questions, bargaining, one more conversation, one more opening, one more chance. On some level, they count on that. Your pursuit would prove they still matter. It would give them emotional leverage. It would reassure them that even after everything, they still hold the center of your emotional world. But when you finally stop, really stop, something changes. Not the silent treatment, not a temporary pause. Real no contact, real withdrawal of access, real refusal to keep bleeding in public for someone who chose to wound you. You stop checking, stop asking, stop waiting, stop making yourself available to confusion, and your silence starts speaking louder than any argument ever could. It says you saw the pattern. It says you recognize the cost. It says you are no longer willing to trade your peace for potential. For an avoidant person, being argued with can still feel like connection. Being hated can still feel like relevance. But being met with calm distance, with no doorway back into your emotional space, that hits differently. Suddenly they are not the center anymore. They are not being chased. They are not being chosen at any price. They are just outside. And if they look back and see you rebuilding, glowing, recovering, becoming harder to reach and easier to lose, the story in their head can start collapsing, because now the person they thought would always keep the door open has quietly locked it and moved on with their life. That is the moment the illusion of control begins to crack. Your healing becomes the thing they did not plan for. They knew how to handle your sadness. They knew how to manage your hope. They knew how to dodge your questions and outweight your patience. But your growth, your detachment, your self-respect, that is a different force, because once you stop chasing the version of them that never really existed, you become difficult to control, you become unavailable to fantasy, you stop feeding the cycle, and that changes the power entirely. They may still check from a distance, they may still wonder, they may still feel a sharp twist when they sense your energy is no longer theirs to influence. But by then, something important has already happened. You have started returning to yourself. That is what they cannot compete with. Not another person, not another relationship, not another distraction. They cannot compete with the version of you that finally understands your own value. And this is why your silence is not just absence. It is consequence. It is truth without explanation. It is the point where the story stops revolving around what they did and starts revolving around what you now choose. You choose boundaries. You choose calm. You choose to stop handing your heart to people who call your loyalty pressure and your love too much. You choose to let the fantasy die so the real life can begin. That kind of choice has weight. It has gravity. And even if they never admit it, even if they never send the message, even if they keep performing normal on the outside, they feel that shift. Because the person who once offered endless understanding is no longer standing there waiting to be wounded again. That version of you is gone. And what replaces it is not bitterness, it is strength. Years later, the damage often looks less dramatic and more quietly sad. The avoidant may build a stable-looking life. They may have a partner, routines, responsibilities, maybe even a family. From the outside, it can seem like everything worked out. And maybe parts of it did. Maybe they found a life that is manageable, functional, orderly, low risk. But manageable is not the same as alive. Safe is not the same as full. A person can win distance and still lose depth. They can protect themselves from engulfment and end up trapped in emotional grey. This is the part few people talk about because it is not loud. It is erosion. It is a long, slow settling into less honesty, less wonder, less emotional colour, less aliveness. They choose connections that do not stretch them too far. They keep intimacy inside a smaller room. They avoid the kind of love that would ask everything from them because they remember what it felt like to be truly seen and how terrifying that was. So they live in controlled weather, predictable, dry, never drowning maybe, but never fully swimming either, and every so often memory returns, not always as a dramatic regret, sometimes as a dull ache while driving, a strange stillness at dinner, a sense that something is missing even in the middle of a life that looks complete enough on paper. They remember what it felt like to be met at a depth they have not found again. They remember the electricity of being known. They remember the rare kind of emotional richness they once touched and then pushed away. That comparison does not have to ruin their whole life to matter. It only has to visit often enough to remind them that they traded something extraordinary for something easier to carry. Now let's make this even clearer, because this is where a lot of people still get stuck. You think justice would look like them crying on your doorstep, confessing everything, finally saying you mattered, finally naming the wound they created, finally matching the depth of your pain with equal depth of truth. But that kind of scene almost never arrives in the exact form you deserve. Sometimes the consequence is not dramatic, sometimes it is internal. It is them feeling increasingly disconnected from their own life and not knowing how to fix it. It is them repeating old patterns with new faces. It is them reaching a point where even peace feels flat because what they really built was emotional limitation, not freedom. It is them carrying a memory they cannot integrate because to do that honestly would require admitting they betrayed someone rare. And that admission would crack open everything they have spent years defending against. So they keep moving, keep managing, keep explaining, keep surviving, but surviving is not the same as healing, and that is the difference. You may have been destroyed by the ending for a season, but if you do the work, the pain becomes movement, it becomes growth, it becomes wisdom, it becomes clearer boundaries, better choices, deeper self-trust. Their pain often becomes repetition, same distance, same shutdown, same chase for low-risk connection, same unfinished grief hidden under different labels. So when you wonder whether they got away with it, understand this. People do not escape themselves. Not really. They can outrun conversation. They can dodge accountability. They can leave rooms, block numbers, change cities, post smiling pictures, even start new relationships. But if the wound remains inside them, if the pattern stays unchallenged, then the price keeps collecting interest. And still, this story is not really about their punishment. It is about your release. Because the biggest shift comes when you stop needing their collapse to validate your pain. The biggest freedom comes when you no longer need proof that they are suffering in order to believe that what happened to you was real. It was real, the betrayal was real, the confusion was real, the bond was real, and your heartbreak does not need their public regret to count. This matters because many deep feelers stay tied to the story for too long by watching, checking, wondering, measuring every sign of whether the other person finally understands. But healing asks for a different direction. It asks you to take your energy out of their inner world and bring it back to your own body, your own life, your own future. It asks you to stop making their awakening the condition for your peace. That does not mean what they did was small. It means you are no longer making your recovery depend on someone who could not even hold your truth while they had access to it. There is power in that, quiet power, mature power, the kind that does not need an audience, the kind that does not have to announce itself, the kind that says, I learned what this cost me and I will not pay it again. Once that settles in, the questions change. Instead of asking why they did it, you begin asking why you accepted so little for so long. Instead of wondering whether they miss you, you begin building a life you no longer want, interrupted by confusion. And that is when the story truly begins to turn in your favor.